Well, friends, as I said, we're going to look at Mark chapter 8 this morning. We're continuing our steady progress through the Gospel of Mark. As you turn there to Mark chapter 8, it's verses 31 to 33, but as you turn there, let me mention this to you. It's not unusual at our house, and maybe some of your houses as well, to hear from the other room, "Stop it. No, you stop it. No, you stop it." Maybe you hear that. Maybe you have heard that before. Maybe some of you are going to hear it soon enough. Right. Our passage this morning that I'm going to read to you, it contains on the surface something that's a little bit similar. Of course, to think of it in those juvenile and petty terms is absurd. There is something much, much larger and more significant going on here than an argument between children like that. We're going to look at this text. We're going to walk through the exchange that takes place between the Lord and Peter specifically. We're going to make some sense of it. And then I have one observation to make about our Lord. So follow with me, if you will, Mark chapter 8, beginning with verse 31. "And he," that is the Lord Jesus, "he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside, and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter, and said, 'Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man.'" Now, a little context. You'll remember that last week, as we looked at the previous section here in Mark 8, Peter's confession that Jesus is indeed the Christ, it's a pivotal moment, both in the gospel narrative, but also in human history in a way. All human history up to this point, there's been a promise that there is a Messiah, there is a Christ coming. And he has finally come. And in verse 29 of the Gospel of Mark here, Peter says, "You are the Christ." And with those words, Jesus has finally been recognized for who he is by a human being for the very first time. Though Peter's confession is imperfect, Peter doesn't see clearly what Jesus has come to do and who he is in fullness yet. Peter and the disciples have rightly identified him. And Jesus has confirmed it. He is the King, the Christ. The King promised for so long has finally come. The Savior, the Deliverer, the Redeemer. He's actually here in the flesh. And the disciples must have been thinking, this is it. Right? The golden age, long promised, is finally dawning. And we are going to see it. Generations have waited to see, and they have not seen. And we're going to see it with our eyes. The kingdom of God come to earth. It must have been thrilling. The only question that they would have been asking, I imagine, is, "You're the Christ, what's next? Where do we begin? Do we need to get an army? Do we rally the people? We're going to need some weapons, I guess. How are we going to go about that? Do we establish a stronghold somewhere, a base of operations? Do we just march right on to Jerusalem? I mean, do we go straight to Rome? You're the Christ. What's your plan? How is this going to unfold?" That must have been near to their thoughts. Verse 31, "And he began to teach them the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed." What? He began to teach them the Son of Man must suffer and be rejected and be killed. And he said this plainly. That is not what they expected. Now that Christ has finally been recognized for who he really is, the Messiah, he immediately begins talking about his suffering and his death. He talks about his resurrection too. That's no secret. But evidently, it's the suffering and the death that strikes these disciples, and understandably so. As Mark makes a point of noting here, he does so plainly. Right? The word that's translated plainly in the English here. I mean, it means it's a bold word, and it means boldly. It means clearly. It means with an openness and a confidence. It's a matter of fact. He must suffer and die. He must. Well, why must he? Must the Christ suffer and die? You know, because the Pharisees and the scribes are just too crafty? The Romans are just too powerful? There's no way that he can accomplish a revolution? No. The man here called the Christ, we know already he has the power to calm a storm. He has the power to raise the dead. He has the power to put an end to the Roman Empire if he chooses to do so. That's not the reason that he must suffer. Is it because that's the only way he can give an example, inspiring enough to change the world? It's not that. He must suffer because he is the Christ. And he had come to save his people. And the only way to save them was to die in their place. As I said last week, their problem, though they did not understand it, it wasn't really Rome. Not ultimately. It wasn't politics. It wasn't the economy or the erosion of their society and their tradition. It wasn't increased secularization as generations turn away from their religion. It wasn't anything like that. It wasn't even racism or classism or sexism that was their real problem. The real problem was that they didn't know God. They did not know their Maker. They were cut off from Him. They were strangers to Him. And being cut off from Him, the light, the source, they had become shriveled and warped and twisted in darkness in a way. They were under condemnation. They were living a bitter life and waiting for an even more bitter end. And it was sin that had put them in that situation. Sin had created this divide between them and their God. It was their own selfish, foolish, futile rebellion against Him, inherited from their first parents all the way down. Their insistence on denying Him the place of respect that He deserved and putting themselves in that place instead. That's sin. And that had made them what they were. A people drowning in pain and suffering and condemnation. And all of their guilt and all of that was a weight dragging them down, in some ways, literally to hell. You imagine a person with a great weight, a heavy weight chained around their neck, sinking into the ocean. You've got an accurate picture of what the human condition is when you imagine that. It was a hopeless condition that Jesus had come to rescue them from, and so step one in that rescue was to cut loose that great burden that was dragging them down. Step one was to take away their sin. And friends, that could not have been done with an army. That could not have been done with a revolution. It could only have been done by someone without sin, willingly taking on the burden of their sin, their guilt, and suffering their punishment in their place as a sacrifice. In other words, it could only have been done by Him, Jesus, the only man who was without sin. And it required suffering and death. It required the cross. That was the only way. That's why He must suffer many things and die. Because He is the Christ. And He intends to fulfill the mission for which He's been sent. Isaiah 53:5. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon Him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And by His wounds we are healed. I want to make just a side note here. The criticism has developed in the last 100 years particularly of the Christian faith that the whole idea of substitutionary atonement and Jesus dying for sinners, that was all tacked on afterwards by imaginative disciples who had hooked their wagon to the spiritual guru and things didn't turn out like they planned. And he came to an early and violent end. And so they made the most of the situation and said this is part of the plan. He was dying for sinners. That's what He was doing. that this is a fanciful excuse for his death, tacked on to his ministry by imaginative disciples who wanted to start a religion and had lost their master. Let me point out to you that the text here today, and many texts just like it, shows that that is impossible. Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. And long before the cross, he made it clear the Son of Man must suffer many things. He must. It's not just that he probably will. This may not go well. He must suffer many things. That is part of the plan. That's the way that redemption is going to be accomplished. He told them that, and he told them that plainly. But at this point, they don't get it. And to be fair, it must have been an absolute shock to hear this. Again, they're expecting the revolution to begin, right? The Son of Man must suffer many things. Their jaws must have dropped to hear him say that. Because what he's saying, it didn't fit at all the conception of the Messiah, the Christ that they had of what he's come to do. But not only was it out of line with their conception, it was in direct opposition to it. Suffering and dying at the hands of his enemies was pretty much the only thing that they knew or thought they knew the Christ wasn't going to do. And so Peter takes it on himself to correct the Lord. Right. Verse 32, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Oh, Peter, right? We don't know exactly what Peter said. We don't know how he said it. Maybe Peter was being gentle, paternal, right? Oh, surely you don't mean that, Lord. You don't know what you're saying. Or maybe Peter's feeling embarrassed, irritated. I mean, he's given up a lot to follow Jesus. Maybe it was, look, that doesn't make any sense. How can you deliver us and rule over us if you're dead? We don't know what he said, but we do know that he corrected the Lord. Yikes. Now, I think we should recognize Peter's motives were surely good here. You know, Peter's not trying to manipulate Jesus for personal gain or take advantage of him. Peter is no doubt trying to intervene and to avert what he thinks is a disaster by stopping this kind of crazy talk about suffering and death. And yet, despite Peter's motives, he's absolutely wrong, isn't he? I mean, and in fact, what Peter is suggesting is downright evil, if we understand the context and the big picture. Early on, when I was a pastor at All Nations Church, and we used to meet at the Gainesboro Public Library. And, you know, we would occasionally have people that would visit our little congregation. And I remember one time an older man visited with us, and after the service, he pulled me aside, and he was just effuse with praise. He said, young man, you know, you have got these gifts, and this is a delightful church, and, you know, I could listen to you talk all day long. You know, all that kind of stuff that, you know, it's probably flattery, right? But he was saying that, he said, but listen, there's one thing you got to do differently. You got to stop talking about the cross and the blood and the death. People don't want to hear about that. You know, people are discouraged. They want to come here and be lifted up. Don't talk about death. Don't talk about blood. Right? Now, I don't doubt that man was trying to give me good advice. He was trying to help me. I think his motives were good. But that man was giving me absolutely terrible advice. He was telling me, listen, you really need to gut the gospel. Take all the life out of it. Take all the power out of it. And give people some fluff to confuse them so that they don't feel bad about themselves. He was giving me downright evil advice, though he did not realize it. And that's what Peter was doing. Though I think Peter did not realize it, Jesus realized what Peter was suggesting and the implications of it. And so Jesus turns around and rebukes him. Verse 33, but turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. It's the same word that Mark uses for both rebukes here. There really is a sort of back and forth exchange. Don't speak that way, Lord. No, don't you speak that way, Peter. Only Jesus does not give his rebuke privately. He does it for all the disciples to hear. He makes his rebuke a public announcement. And he doesn't do it all that gently, does he? Get behind me, Satan. I mean, there's no way to present that doesn't have an edge to it, right? Get behind me. When he says get behind me, he's effectively saying, get out of my sight, be gone. And he calls Peter Satan. Now, Satan means, Bruce mentioned it a few weeks ago, it means adversary, opponent, right? Which Peter had unwittingly become when he started to oppose Jesus in his work, to his way to the cross this way. But there's something more than just that term being used because Peter had become an opponent in this moment. There is another time that Jesus says something very similar, but at that time he was speaking literally to Satan and speaking to him directly. In Matthew chapter 4, you remember the temptation of Jesus. The last of those temptations goes like this. Again, the devil took Jesus to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. And Jesus said to him, be gone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Be gone, Satan. Get behind me. Get out of my face. Right. It's more than just the wording that's similar here. What Peter is doing, though he does not realize it, is he is laying the very same temptation before the Lord that Satan was. And that is the temptation to walk away from the cross and to avoid the suffering that it would entail to finish the mission that God had given him. You may have read Aaron Griffin's devotional this last week that was sent out. I think he called it The Shortcut. It's about this very idea. That Satan was proposing in that moment that Jesus take the throne. He take authority over the whole world. In fact, he take the glory and establish his rule and bring his kingdom on the earth in power. And he could do so without having to go to the cross, without having to die and to suffer. You don't have to suffer all of that stuff. There is another way. For those of you that are Lord of the Rings fans, this is Boromir's logic with Frodo, right? You don't have to take that ring all the way there and destroy it. You can use it, right? You can wear it. The devil had crafted this temptation carefully and specifically. He knew the Lord Jesus. He knew as a man what would appeal to his humanity, what would hit him in his weakness. Peter did not know those things. And it seems that Peter has stumbled into this accidentally, but he has laid the same snare before the Lord that Satan did. And the temptation is the same. Don't. You don't have to suffer. Don't go to the cross. You know, I don't understand it fully. There's a lot of things I don't understand. Astrophysics, neuroscience, lots of real things I don't understand. I don't understand this, but it seems very clear. There is a temptation here that Jesus really felt, that he really was tempted. The temptation to avoid the cross, it was real to him. It got to him in a way. It makes sense. He was a human being, after all, fully man. And like any human man, he didn't want to suffer. He didn't want to be hounded and bad-mouthed by the Pharisees and the rulers of his people. He didn't want to be betrayed and abandoned and left all alone by his closest friends. He didn't want to be beaten and mocked and spit on and tortured and killed. Surely he didn't. He didn't want to die like that. And beyond even that, because he was indeed a real human being, he didn't want to feel the weight of our sin on his shoulders and feel that pain. He didn't want to endure the agony of his Father's wrath. He didn't want to be cut off from his Father and all life and light and goodness, and to suffer alone all the horrors of hell himself. He didn't want to go through that pain. He was truly tempted by Satan's offer, by Peter's suggestion here. In Hebrews chapter 2 tells us, for because he himself has suffered when tempted. Christ was tempted and he suffered. Hebrews chapter 4, for we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are. He really did suffer. He really was tempted. Yet, Hebrews 4 tells us, yet without sin. Yet without sin. And that's the amazing part. He was tempted to avoid the cross, tempted to shrink back from the suffering and the pain, but he was going to do it. He was not going to hide from it. He was not going to turn away from what the Father had laid before him. He was going to obey his Father in every detail and without fail. He had been sent to save souls, and for that he must suffer many things and die. And he would suffer many things and die. He was tempted and he was tried as we are, more than we can imagine, frankly. But unlike us, he did not give in. He did not prioritize his own comfort above God's will, as we so often do. He did not think of his own safety, his own life, these lesser things, the things of man, that Peter's got his mind set on. No, he has his mind set firmly on the things of God. And as Hebrews 12 puts it, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, and is now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. The world, this world, has a Savior, and he suffered. The church has a Lord who bears the scars on his hands and his head and his side. And it is through suffering that Jesus Christ obeyed, and the Father accomplished the redemption of the world. Now, this has implications for us, for the church, for Christian discipleship, period. And we're going to get into those implications in some detail next time when we consider this passage that follows and our Lord's call to discipleship at the end of the chapter, verses 34 to 38. But this morning, with just the last minute here, I want us to think a little bit more carefully about Jesus and what we see about him in this passage. As I said, this is an odd passage in a way. You know, the somber turn that Jesus takes to talk about his death, it's sudden. And his especially sharp rebuke of Peter is another instance of Jesus behaving in a way that seems strange to us. It's a little unsettling. It may even appear to be out of character in the way we think about him. But as you look below the surface here and you consider what he's doing, what he's going through, and how he's doing it, I think his glory starts to become apparent here. What I mean by that is this man who's described in this passage, when we consider what he's going through and what's happening and what he's doing, it really is something amazing that he's in the middle of. It's something incredible. I mean, you think about it. He has this task laid before him that is a heavier burden than any one of us, in fact, any human being has ever borne before. And he is on his way to take the full weight of all of the sins of his people on his shoulders. Right? On his sinless soul, he's going to bear this mountain of guilt and shame and pain. Like an avalanche, it's going to come on him, and it's going to crush him to the grave. He knows that a terrifying, agonizing, lonely death lies ahead of him. And here in this passage, those closest to him, the only ones who have any sense of who he truly is and what he's come to do, his friends, are laying a snare of temptation before him. And not just any run-of-the-mill temptation either, but one crafted by the devil himself. Jesus is really tempted. We cannot understand it fully, but the God-man suffers real temptations. And yet, he does not waver from the purpose for which he's come. He does not give in. He does not flee from the task or shrink back from it. His resolve is as strong as steel to obey his Father. Luke puts it this way in this parallel passage in Luke chapter 9. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. He knows it. He knows the Christ must suffer because he is the Christ, and he's been sent to save his people from their sins. For our salvation, for the glory of his Father, he will go to the cross. He must. Friends, I hope that you can see him there in this text. I mean, weighed down by what was coming, tempted to turn away, and yet with steadfast resolve to obey his Father's will and redeem his people. His face set like stone to redeem his bride and honor God. Has there ever been another man like this one? I mean, has there ever been someone who suffered so much loneliness of soul, being cut off from God, and faced it with such courage, such selflessness, and without any sin? Has there ever been such a man, such a pure and powerful manifestation of love on the earth as this man? As Jesus Christ, with his face set to suffer and die for sinners. Could there ever be another love like this? There could not. Nothing compares to this. Nothing ever will. The road to the cross begins in earnest here in the Gospel of Mark. That's a turning point. Now we're headed to the cross. Everything points that direction. And already, the glory of Christ and his sacrifice for sinners begins to shine through the darkness in just this passage. Because here is God himself, his divine heart opened up for all of us to see. And what we see there, what we see in him, his mind, his plan, his wisdom, his faithfulness, his great steadfast love, it's glorious. He shines with glory here. He's heavy with it. Even in a passage like this one. No, Peter, I'm going to go to the cross. The Son of Man must suffer many things and die and rise again. Friends, do we see Christ for who he really is? Do you see him? Do you see any of his glory here? He is not just part of the machinery of salvation. He is not one gear in a machine of God's redemptive plan who came to do his part so that when he did what he's supposed to do, we could believe in him and kind of turn the crank and get our ticket to heaven. Don't think of him in such crudely pragmatic terms, in such systematic terms like that, as something just provided for us so we don't have to go to hell. He's not something. He is someone. And he is someone who is wonderful. He is someone who is glorious and like nobody else. Have you seen that about him yet? Have you tasted that? On some level, that's what it is to be a Christian at all, to see his glory by faith. And friends, he is worth worshiping. He is worth serving. He is worth giving up anything, giving up everything. He's worth following. Young people here in this room or that are watching, he's worth studying. He's worth pursuing. He's worth seeking. And all the superheroes in the Marvel Cinematic Universe don't compare to him, the reality of who he is. Athletes, celebrities, nobody compares to Christ All of that is a pale comparison to this person in this text. None of us compare to him. And older people, like myself, don't forget who he is. Don't lose your first love and turn him into some kind of machinery. You and I are not great. We will never be. He is great. Here is greatness. Jesus Christ, our Savior. Let's pray together now. Lord Jesus, we believe that you live even right now as I speak about you and read your word. We believe that you live. You said that you would suffer and die, and you did, and you said that you would rise again, and you did. And are even now seated at the right hand of the Father in heaven. We pray, Lord, that by faith you would give us a taste, an even deeper taste for your glory and how good you are, so that we would really love you. We'd love you not in a technical way, not in a surface way, but we'd love you from the heart. Thank you for your word that teaches us. Thank you for your Spirit that gives us life. Thank you for the truth. And thank you for being our Savior. Thank you for giving yourself to us. We pray this, Jesus, in your name. Amen.